Good morning and welcome to Achates Inspires, our free virtual webinar for cultural sector leaders, and a particular welcome to those of you new to this session. This session was recorded on the 20th of February and all information is correct at time of broadcast. And the session is first broadcast at 1 p.m. on 27th of February. And if you're watching at this time, our Achates colleagues are on hand to answer any questions via the comment section on the chat. And I'm really delighted to be able to say that this session of Achates Inspires is being presented jointly by both Achates and our sister organisation, the Cultural Philanthropy Foundation. And I'm going to introduce you to Rose, the director, in just a moment. Achates is a strategy, income generation, organisational change and recruitment company. And we're really delighted to be able to welcome you all today as we explore this critical topic of our 9th type of impact, environmental benefit. For over 10 years, Achates has provided provocation and inspiration to organisations and senior individuals across the cultural sector, providing expert, market disruptor and inclusive thinking across strategy, recruitment, organisational change and income generation. We set up Achates Inspires as a cross-arts forum for chief executives, executive directors, and other sectors to learn together, hearing from expert voices on new opportunities across organisational and creative development, and to provide a peer learning network to pool expertise across the sector. As we come together to face the challenges, both of today and in the future, there's never been a greater need for the opportunity to find solutions together, which is why we launched Achates Inspires in 2023. The Cultural Philanthropy Foundation was established in 2016 to campaign for the democratisation of culture, recognising that philanthropy is both an expression of empathy and a form of power. Since then, our work has encompassed interventions and initiatives, including the 2023 London Ticket Bank, the 2024 Culture Makes campaign, and an annual thought leadership lecture, which was delivered in 2024 by Caroline Lucas, who highlighted the central role the cultural sector must play in responding to the climate and nature crises. Collaborating with hundreds of cultural organisations across the UK, the Foundation strives to raise awareness of the value culture contributes to society. Together, we advocate for new approaches to cultural sector funding and work to foster a more inclusive and resilient future for culture and heritage. So now it's time to welcome our panellists. So firstly, welcome Annie. Hello to you. Annie Duffield is Director of Audiences and Income at the Horniman Museum. Annie Duffield is a strategic marketing and communications leader with 15 years experience in cultural organisations, spanning national and independent museums and visitor attractions. She joined the Horniman in summer 2024, and she started her career in destination marketing, working on brand positioning for London's South Bank before specialising in campaign management for some of the UK's most visited destinations, including the National Gallery, the Museum of London, and the royal residences of Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace. Annie then moved to lead marketing and communications for the innovative educational charity, the Institute of Imagination, in 2017, to develop audiences and support a significant capital project. For the past 4 years, she's been part of the leadership team at the Postal Museum, one of London's newest museums, and a recent addition to the Arts Council England National Portfolio. Here, Annie led audience development strategy, drove ticketing income, and refreshed the museum's brand alongside spearheading the museum's first environmental sustainability framework. Annie, just say hello to everyone.
Hi, that was a very long introduction.
Lovely to have you with us, Annie. Here. Thanks, Annie. James Steventon is Director of Firmin Woods. James is an artist, a writer, and runner based in Northamptonshire. In addition to lecturing at universities across the UK, including the School of Art, Architecture and Design at London Metropolitan University, where he has taught for over 20 years, James is Director of Firmin Woods Contemporary Art, an educational charity that supports life through art by commissioning innovative and meaningful ways for artists to engage with audiences in public spaces across Northamptonshire and online. In 2021, James was nominated as a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in recognition of his support for contemporary young artists through his work at Firmin Wood's Contemporary Art, his championship of innovation, emerging and impactful arts practice, and his participation in training and advocacy work through Engage's digital special interest representative. James first worked with Firmin Woods as education officer for over a decade before leading the organisation as director since 2017. In 2019, Firmin Woods won a special commendation by the Nick Reeves Award for Arts and Environment. And in 2022, the organisation updated its charitable objectives to explicitly use the word climate change. In 2020, they were named Art Charity of the Year in the Central England Prestige Awards, and their temporary exhibition space was named Best Contemporary Art Gallery in Northamptonshire in the Midlands Enterprise Awards. Firmin Woods was also awarded an Achates Philanthropy Prize bursary as an organisation that undertook interesting and exciting examples of proactive engagement with communities during the pandemic, demonstrating how the arts have reacted to it and the results achieved through these efforts. And I'm very happy to say that that bursary was led and delivered by our now director of the Cultural Philanthropy Foundation, Rose Goddard. Rose Goddard is director of the Cultural Philanthropy Foundation and a specialist in the role that arts and culture play in tackling the climate crisis. Rose has experience across literature, publishing, and arts fundraising. She began her career at Penguin Random House, where she was an editor for Penguin Classics and Particular Books, before moving to national charity, the Reading Agency, where she ran the World Book Night and Quick Reads programmes. In 2018, Rose became prize manager for the Women's Prize for Fiction, overseeing its move to charitable status, before advising on fundraising and strategy for numerous clients as head of trusts at Achates. More recently, she served as executive director for Wimbledon Book Fest and founded the Climate Fiction Prize, a new literary award that celebrates the best contemporary novels tackling the climate crisis, and which will be awarded for the first time in May this year. And I was so delighted with myself of making the link between James and Rose that I forgot to ask James to say hello. So James, would you say hello? And then Rose, would you say hello as well?
Hello, good morning.
Thanks, James. Lovely to have you with us. Sorry to have skipped over you there. And Rose, lovely to have you with us. Hello.
Hello, really lovely to be here. Thanks, Caroline.
Not at all. So, in January this year, Achates announced an addition to our 8 types of impact of culture and heritage, which have been the focus of the Cultural Philanthropy Foundation's year-long Culture Makes campaign, celebrating the breadth of impact of culture and heritage, and by introducing the 9th type of impact, environmental benefit. Since their development in 2020, the 8 types of impact of culture and heritage have been adopted as a leading tool for communicating the value and impact of the sector, with almost 300 cultural organisations across the UK using them to celebrate in the Culture Makes campaign. Until this point, we had deliberately not included environmental benefit as one of the types of impact, because the sector was at such an early stage in addressing these issues, and was, of course, until recently focused on mitigation of environmental harm rather than actual benefit created. However, it's clear that the time has now come for a more holistic approach to environmental issues, rather than simply focusing on one aspect, such as building or touring productions. And it's time to both build on and ramp up the good work of so many of you in the sector. And so we launched the 9th type of impact of culture and heritage in January 2025. And you can find the associated outcomes and outputs framework on our platform, Achates Community. But what does this actually mean for cultural organisations? How do we take what we're doing and celebrate it and build on it as part of our critical organisational impact, but also challenge ourselves to build on that work to increase our environmental impact across all aspects of our activity, from air pollution to green spaces to energy, and even where our pensions are invested, as well as critically communicating through the work we create and curate. And how can you get involved with the work of the Cultural Philanthropy Foundation over the next couple of years to help move the sector forward? These and many others are the questions I'm excited to dive into today, and I'm delighted to be joined by these three eminent sector leaders who are focusing on just these questions. So I'm going to ask each of you in turn to outline the current focus of the organisation you're in terms of environmental benefit. And Rose, perhaps I can come to you first to talk a little bit about the Cultural Philanthropy Foundation and the work that I know is going to be the focus for the next 2 years.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Thanks so much, Caroline. So really excited to be part of this conversation. Such a vital area to be discussing today, and something I'm really passionate about. At the Cultural Philanthropy Foundation, we talk about the work we do across three main areas, really, and this environmental piece touches on all of them. So first, we talk about us as convening the sector, so bringing the sector together in various ways, campaigning for its value and thought leadership to drive that forward, and kind of offer provocations about the sector's future. And as I said, we're looking to deliver environmental benefit and talk about the impact that the sector can have in the climate crisis across all three of these areas. So I'll just really briefly mention how we see that working. So on the convening side, by really bringing organisations together, as we are doing today, in partnership with Achates, for example, to share insights, best practice in this space. For example, we're looking at a possible peer learning day later in the year with our case study and community partners, which I'll come on to talk about. We're doing things like speaking at roundtables, pitching to host open discussions at conferences, seeking out opportunities for exchanges of ideas with other sector leaders and also grassroots audiences. And then campaigning. So really talking about, shouting about, being a mouthpiece for the sector on the vital role that it can play, exactly as Caroline says, not just in mitigating the negative impacts of the climate crisis, but moving towards driving change and growing new ways of thinking. So we're going to be working on a PR campaign around this. And thought leadership, finally, where we deliver our annual lecture, regular insights throughout the year. So our lecture in November was given by the brilliant Caroline Lucas, who kind of really kicked off this focus for the foundation on environmental benefit. And she spoke very wonderfully and passionately on this topic. So that's what we're doing. I think really excited to be working across those three areas and especially with both James and Annie as well on this work.
Super, thanks, Rose. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a moment. James, perhaps you could tell us a bit about the brilliant work of Firmin Woods.
I don't know where to start. So you mentioned in the introduction, relatively recently, we actually added the words climate change to our charitable objectives. I think, in truth, and we've been in existence for over 25 years. I don't actually think we've changed the nature of what we do. I think we're just more honest about it, and we need to articulate it now more than ever. So we're continuing with a really exciting program of artists and projects, which I think maybe if I read out our charitable objectives, I better refer to them so I get them precisely right.
James, and I think it's a fascinating point. I'm going to come back to it in a moment because I think there's a real challenge for everybody in the sector here. So please go ahead.
So our first is that we promote, assist, and improve the arts for public benefit, which we'll continue to do. And then secondly, with a slight amendment at the end, is that we exist to encourage and advance the education of the public through the provision of educational opportunities relating to the arts and environment. And then the newish part is, and in particular, but not exclusively, the visual arts and climate change. I've shared with some of you in the past and previous projects going back to before I can remember how many years ago it was, projects that I think are fitted under that banner. I think it's useful that we're clear and articulate about that now and the intention sort of in the future. I think it's easier to deliver once you can articulate what it is you're trying to deliver. And we've got some exciting projects lined up, some of which I can't quite mention yet because funding's to be confirmed, but hopefully it will have some positive impact.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. And we all know that feeling very well indeed. I think what's so brilliant about the point James is making, it's a really key point in terms of whether you're doing it in your articles or in your organizational purpose, which I think could do the same job, is if you're not stating environmental benefit as one of your areas of activity, one of the types of impacts, and we're talking about the 9 types of impact today that you're creating, I don't think you could reasonably not take money from an oil or gas manufacturer, because it wouldn't be in your stated purpose to be focusing on that issue. So I think, James, you've created a really interesting point there, which I'm sure might come up when we have the chat discussions with viewers. So thanks so much for that. Brilliant stuff. Annie, over to you. Tell us a bit about the Brilliant Horniman.
Hi. Yeah, so for anyone watching who doesn't know the Horniman Museum and Gardens, we are London's only museum dedicated to world cultures and the natural environment, and we sit within around 16 acres of green space in the middle of South London. So we're in quite a unique position for an urban museum to address the topics that we're talking about today across our spaces, with our audiences, with our staff, both indoors and outdoors. So in terms of our current focus, we launched a climate and ecology manifesto a few years ago, and that's really shaped a lot of the work that the museum has been doing over the last few years, but particularly a major capital project, which we just broke ground on in January, which is a really exciting milestone for us. The project's called Nature and Love, and it really brings us that step closer to achieving a lot of the aims that were set out in that manifesto, which you can find on the museum's website if you're interested to look at it. That capital project is a total redevelopment of our historic natural history galleries. And that's a really important focus for us, because that is about co-curation, about working with audiences, and about addressing the climate crisis, putting it in the centre of interpretation, but in a way that is about advocacy and change, not about causing more climate anxiety for our audiences. So we do tackle topics head on, but the focus is on working with our audiences to sort of develop that narrative. On the outside of the museum, we're developing several new spaces. So we've got new greenhouse spaces, new community garden. We're improving access to our nature trail, and we've got a new nature play area and cafe being built in a sort of disused, essentially, space in the museum's gardens. So the real purpose of this project is to widen access for different audiences, but also to place that kind of discussion topic around environmental sustainability and tackling the climate crisis in the heart of our interpretation. So that's our big focus at the moment, and will be for the next couple of years. And it's taking up, obviously, the attention of pretty much everyone across the organisation. So it's something to rally around.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Annie. And I just can't wait to see those developments coming to fruition at Horniman. And of course, one of the great things about it being a co-creation process is the process is as much part of it as the actual outcome in itself. So really exciting stuff. So I'd love to ask you all, and perhaps in this occasion, I'll follow that order before I mix things up a bit and with further questions. But I'd love to ask you all about what are the areas you're excited to consider building on next in terms of your creating your environmental benefit, and what are the areas you're finding most challenging to address and why? Rose, perhaps you could start by talking about the foundation and where it's trying to support the sector before I come to James and then Annie in terms of specific outcomes and types of work they're doing. So yeah, from your perspective, Rose, perhaps particularly in terms of challenging the sector to raise that aspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my challenge is also my most exciting area, so I'm gonna roll them into one. I would say it's probably that campaigning side of things. So I think we're really clear at the foundation that what we want to do is work with organisations to look in terms of case studies at what they're doing, how they're really driving environmental benefit across 2 years. So it's quite a kind of meaty piece of work, which, yeah, really pleased to say that Horniman and Firminwoods will be part of. I think as an absolute kind of other side of the coin to that, and totally vital, is the PR side of things. So we want to tell these stories. We don't want case studies to just kind of be static on our website. You know, we want to get the message out there that the culture sector is at the forefront of this fight, the response to the climate crisis. I think quite a few organisations are not doing a huge amount around PR, national strategic communications, partly because they're just too busy, don't have the resources. So that's really where we want to come in and support the sector in that way. So yeah, really excited to be working on that comms piece over the next couple of years.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rose. And I know that we're wrestling with where can we add value? Where can we really try and direct change and reach new audiences in our small but mighty way? So yeah, it's a good challenge to be taking on. Brilliant. James, over to you. Tell us a little bit about the areas you're really excited to consider on building on next.
Yeah, I think similar to Rose's answer, I'm also excited by the challenges, perhaps for slightly different reasons. So it's both an organisational goal and a personal passion of mine that the impact that art's can have on people that don't ordinarily have it in their lives, because when it happens, it can be really profound. And I think, sadly, for lots of reasons, such as, like poverty is a simple one, the environmental risks that we face due to climate breakdown are likely to be most pronounced for the same marginalised groups. So I think we can kind of kill two birds with one stone is a completely inappropriate phrase, but that's the intention. And I think to pursue the issue of our time, of all of our times, has got to be exciting. I think anybody that pursues a career in the creative industries has some kind of innate sense of value, but to see it, to objectively witness the role it can play, that's exciting. I think perhaps I enjoy with working with groups who perhaps say, and we've had this in the past, that art might not be for them, and slowly changing their minds can be quite exciting. If I'm honest, I probably have less patience for people who think protection of the environment is not for them, but equally changing those minds is where the challenges are, and I think the arts can meet it. And then on more practical terms, we're actually, after working peripatetically for lots of years, we're currently working on securing a new home for the organisation. So the motivation is that it'll allow us to do more good, and then the greater positive environmental impact is part of that. But the challenge is to do that in a way that doesn't present more environmental harm.
Wow, what a challenge that is as well, James, isn't it? And because also when we're all looking for funding now, we're all saying this is how extending our benefit and our reach. But absolutely, when you're valuing your environmental benefit against your negative environmental impact, thinking about that really carefully, such a good challenge to all of us. I just wanted, before I hand over to Annie, who I'm sure that resonates with as well, because you've got such a big capital project at the present time, such an important point, just say how brilliant it is that you're taking that challenge in terms of not just the people who are already engaged with climate issues, but actually thinking who else can be brought in, and absolutely recognizing that poverty is a barrier, absolutely. And if the pressures that you're facing are such, this may not be your priority, but it's still very much affecting your lives. So thank you, James. Annie, I'm going to pass the baton to you here, if I may.
Yeah, I think what James said there around mitigating essentially growth and the need for growth and impact against the environmental impact of a building or a site is our biggest challenge at the moment. So we know that our carbon footprint increased last year on the previous year. And obviously we're making steps towards positive change, but we also have a difficult funding situation across the sector where the need for self-generated income and growth is really important. And how you balance that against the impact of your site is a real challenge. So when you have a 125-year-old site with buildings of a variety of different ages, securing that funding, which is about infrastructure upgrades to mitigate that impact, is the biggest challenge for us. But I think that the funding landscape is changing, and recognising that that is an important area of impact for museums, and that we can't achieve much else if that is not foregrounded and important. So we're very lucky that part of the capital project addresses that. It's National Lottery funded predominantly. And one of the areas of impact is our greenhouse spaces. So we'll have air source heat pumps installed there, rainwater harvesting, but that's just one of many buildings across the site that need looking at in order to actually touch the sides in terms of the carbon footprint, our scope 1 and 2 emissions. So that's a challenge, but also an opportunity, because it does seem like that the landscape is changing positively in that way, as challenging as that is. In terms of the real opportunities for benefit, I think it's the step change. And again, it's similar to what James was saying, the step change of having different spaces to be able to engage audiences with. And part of what we're doing with this project is trying to make the space at the museum more accessible for audiences that didn't traditionally come or weren't coming in greater numbers. The research that underpinned the project told us that around 50% of people living in Lewisham, our local borough, are renting, and a lot of them don't have access to high quality green space or private green space. So what is available at the museum is really important, particularly for young people, and recognising that inequality of impact, particularly in a site that borders the South Circular, where air quality in Lewisham is poor. It's really poor. So the projects that we can use this major change as a springboard to do more of, and to talk more about, and to raise awareness of, is a really exciting opportunity for us, I think. And this sort of process of co-curation has told us more about what's really important to our local audiences. And that's the first step towards behaviour change, because if we give people real life and real world ways of interacting with the things that they're thinking about and talking about, such as biodiversity, air pollution, local habitats, that's where we can start to have a real impact, I think. It becomes less a notional idea, less a kind of, it's not a hypothetical if they can actually come on site, or we can go out to areas nearby and provide that sort of scaffolding for the thinking that's already going on within communities that are around us.
And I think one of the things that's really resonant in what you're saying, Annie, if I may, and it flows through James's work clearly as well, is that long-term commitment to communities, and that actually being the trusted friend and provider of opportunity. And that's so, so important. I should also acknowledge that the outcomes framework that we've created for the 9th type of impact has absolutely been co-created. We've been fortunate enough to have a whole range of groups inputting into that, and we tried to go through as much policy and funding policy as we can. And I should acknowledge that we added air pollution after our first meeting with Annie and Gordon, who's the director of the Horniman, because they pointed out to us that it was a really critical factor that we'd overlooked. So yeah, thank you for your help with that, both of you. So I'd love to come to you, James, next, and then Annie, and then back to Rose. How do you go about monitoring and evaluating your impact at present, and in terms of environmental benefit in particular, and what do you do with that data when you've captured it at the present time? So James, over to you first, if I may.
So I was thinking about the choice words, because the impact is such a aggressive word. And sometimes that can be, I guess, in terms of negative impacts, it's probably appropriate, and positive impact, it's sometimes more subtle. So it's simply in terms of footprint, we use things like the Gallery Climate Coalition's carbon calculator to track our annual carbon footprint, and we can drill down into that annually or project by project, and that's been useful to reinforce what I think intuitively we thought anyway, so, make changes such as we value and continue to work with artists on an international basis, but I don't think we can justify long haul flights. And when you see that on a pie chart, it's a no-brainer. It really is. Conversations with artists and curators around that has been really encouraging, actually, even to their own detriment. And we've also used it's the network conditions carbon calculator to explore the quite often they're hidden impacts of creation and delivery of digital artworks, such as it could be a live streamed event or a sort of online exhibition. Now, what was interesting with that, other than getting the kind of the figures at the end of it, is that we presented the work alongside the individual work's carbon footprint, and we were explicit about that with the artists at the point of commissioning. And what was interesting is that they rose to that challenge. So rather than seeing it as a restriction to the work, they came back with some really interesting, exciting work, which I think ultimately it's, I mean, even things that's led people to consider how they consume music, for example, or one work that is ongoing. We're still working with the artist at the moment, to create some solar and possibly lunar powered servers to questioning why should information be available 24/7 and what's the cost of that. So subtle sort of changes in how people think that have come through works. And then an exciting project we did last year was we had, I think this is the best funding condition we've ever had, which was um, this was for the Northamptonshire Community Foundation's Creative Climate Action Fund. And one of the conditions to receiving the funding was that we would create a toolkit with some positive climate actions that people could take. So this is great. But what's the creative response to that? And it became its own sort of project, and as they do. Um, and worked with a couple of artists, Chiara Dell'Arba, who created this sort of toolkit. And then to launch it, my colleague Abby Canning worked with lots of local schools to create an animation which we screened on a pedal-powered cinema, and worked with children across the county. And what's been really encouraging is it was, I mean, it was implicit in the work and the conversations we had, but they took to it so well and understood it. And they've led the change within their individual schools. And some of the examples, often schools have signed up to various different sort of nationwide initiatives. And then at their sort of local level, there was a school who, I believe they're having an electricity-free day, just to see what that might be like and just to sort of feel what they're consuming on a daily basis. Another school are measuring their food waste each week and aiming to do better. And then there's that, kind of sort of primary school, there was some children suggesting they wanted to buy some police helmets so they could inspect classes to make sure they weren't leaving lights on when they shouldn't and things like that. But it's all come from the children through this project. It's just been this sort of instigator. So it's really encouraging to see that it does, the arts do work. It does communicate on quite an emotional level where, the science has been settled for years, but it needs a project to engage people to make that impact really happen.
Thank you, James. They're such beautiful examples of whether it's artists or young people responding to constraint in a creative way, but also what flows through your narrative, if I may, is empathy and using culture to really create that empathy and understanding. And I know that's something that's so important to Rose and the work we're doing at the foundation. So thank you. Annie, over to you. Monitoring and evaluation at present and how you're using that information when you've captured it.
Yeah, so we're a DCMS-sponsored museum, so we report impacts directly to DCMS using toolkits that are available to us. And we report on all of the standard things you'd expect, so emissions, recycling and reuse of materials, and we also report against the aims of our climate and ecology manifesto. We make all of that public, so we put that on the website. We have an annual impacts report, and we also have a section of the website which is about climate and ecology. So there we summarise some of that impact data. We also report on things like contributions to scientific publications. So we have an aquarium at the museum, and a really amazing project at the aquarium called Project Coral, which is all about regeneration of coral reefs, both locally and globally, which is quite amazing because we have such a small space and we have this wonderful scientific research going on behind the scenes in partnership with universities and locations across the world. So that sort of impact on an academic level, on a sort of that kind of level is also reported on, because we feel that what we can do there and how we can use our facilities to push forward that side of research is also great impacts and really important. We use our post-visit survey as well to establish what kind of impact we're having on audiences. So we have 3 main questions that we ask around whether a visit has made somebody appreciate the natural world more, whether it's increased their curiosity, and also whether or not they perceive us as an organisation to be environmentally conscious, which is important because it's, if we're evidencing and showing what we're doing, that's influence on people too. And we get consistently high scores for all of those. So 84% of visitors agree that they have a greater appreciation for the natural world after visiting the museum, which is so high and really wonderful to see. And we do use that data to evidence why it's important to carry on doing a lot of the programs that we're doing, but also why it's important to continue investing in those areas, because it's obviously something that our audiences are interested in and want to learn more about. We evaluate our learning programs with teachers and with pupils. Same with our community programs. We're constantly seeking feedback from the visitors and the audiences that we work with, and that helps us to move those programs on and sort of take them into their next iteration. And I think that kind of public sharing of a lot of that information is really useful, because if we do have other organisations that come to us to ask and to want to benchmark, it's all there and it's all public, including when we're not making progress. So like I said about our emissions data, making sure that we are sharing that and giving it some context, and addressing and sharing what we are going to do next to reduce that impact.
Brilliant, Annie. I have to say it's really impressive, and that statistic is great. You must be so proud of that. Really astonishing, but yeah, clearly can see that it's encouraging you to do even more. Rose, love to hear a little bit about perhaps a little bit more of a macro view in terms of what you think is happening in terms of monitoring and evaluation at present, and how you're going to be encouraging the sector to think about doing so. Before I ask you to jump in, I'm just going to go back to James's point and say it's such a good point about impact being such a strong word. We did used to say the types of value, but we found people got really confused between value and values. So we had to move to using impact as something that people understood exactly what that was. But Rose, over to you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we exist really to support the sector, campaign for its value, drive change through partnerships. So all of our work is really focused on that. And we're going to be working with organisations on a programme of tracking change in the way that they are delivering environmental benefit across a couple of years. So how that change is happening, monitoring outcomes and having a look at those every 6 months. So with our partners, there'll probably be between sort of 4 and 6, possibly a couple of others organisations across the UK. We're looking at a spread of art forms, museums, visual arts, but also theatres, literature organisations, and so on. And with them, we're going to be selecting outcomes from the Achates framework that we've talked about, the 9 types of impact of culture and heritage. So yeah, we'll work with our partners to select the outcomes that are right for them, and those will range from things like, is local air quality being improved? Is the organisation perhaps moving towards net zero? And we're not looking for an organisation to have reached perfection at the end of the 2 years or even be anywhere near it. But what we're looking at is how are things changing? And crucially, how can we tell that story, and what is really exciting that's happening here? But also, really importantly, those behavioural change outcomes for audiences, staff and board. So is, environmental and climate justice awareness and literacy, is that being improved amongst audiences, amongst board, amongst staff, through the work that the organisation is doing? So we're looking, really holistically at the level of the gallery, at the level of the museum, not just individual programmes. And I know I keep banging the comms drum, but I feel it's so important that we will be telling these stories, not just to the sector, but more broadly, at conferences, at events, as part of a PR and a comms campaign on our own channels, but with partners as well, to really, really get that message out there that culture is absolutely key to this, to what is, I'll just mention what a brilliant poet and writer that I work with on the Climate Fiction Prize said to me, Owen Shears, that the climate crisis is not an issue that we're facing, it's the context of everything that we do now. It's what we exist in and amongst. So yes, how can we have the most impact and kind of harness the power of the sector in the most meaningful way possible?
Brilliant. Thank you, Rose. Yeah, and that's a really great point of inspiration. Annie, I'm going to come to you next, and then James, and then back to Rose. What role would you like to play, thinking of culture as an ecosystem, but also in terms of its broader reach in the communities? What role would you like to play, both in terms of inspiring other organisations, but also in terms of the understanding and behaviours of your own staff, board, and audiences?
Yeah, so perhaps I'll start with our staff and our board. So one of the things that we do is that we've committed to delivering climate literacy training to staff, volunteers, and the board, which is quite a large undertaking when you have 200 volunteers, 150 staff, and a really active board. But it's a really fundamental way of bringing people along on the journey with you. As an organisation, people join you with different levels of understanding about a lot of these impacts, and you can't assume knowledge and you can't assume care. So that literacy training sort of brings people up to a level so that people understand that within the context of the organisation. But we also talk to our front-facing staff and provide training about how they can talk to visitors about communicating the climate crisis in a way that doesn't focus on climate anxiety. So as I spoke about earlier, that's a really important barrier to overcome, to stop people just switching off, to stop people dipping into disinformation as quickly as they possibly can. So having that piece of training, it supports staff to not feel overwhelmed by the conversations, but it also supports visitors to engage in them in a more proactive way. So we start internally, and then that kind of spills out into our approach with our audiences. And I think that kind of that impact on local audiences is where behaviour change can really kick in. So again, I talked about giving people real, tangible, hands-on ways to create impacts. And a nice example from recently is a community project where we work with Lewisham Council and community groups around our very local area to talk to them about what they wanted to do to improve their local green spaces. And it was all around biodiversity and habitats for birds. So we were able to convene the partners to provide the materials, to provide the expertise. They built the bird boxes, they installed them where they felt they were most needed, and we could have that conversation about the impact that that had on those audiences directly, doing something tangible and then being able to take that knowledge away and repeat it without us if they want to, or with us if they do. So that's the kind of, I suppose, the bleed-in approach through internal to external. And in terms of sector, I think it's all about partnership working. And people say this all the time, but we want to really live and breathe that, and recognise that no, we don't have the resources of the huge national museums, but we have more resource available to us than a lot of the smaller museums, civic or independent. So the more information sharing we can do, the more working in partnership that we can do, and transparency about processes, that's really positive. And I think that is, it's not just about inspiration there, that's about two-way learning. You know, everyone is doing things in different ways, working with different resources. If we can share what we're doing and listen to what others are doing, that's the role that culture can play. We have to listen as much as we have to focus on inspiring and behaviour change. It's always got to be a two-way conversation.
Beautifully put, Annie, and I love that. And we've got to be listening to our communities, stretching ourselves, seeing what we learned, evolving our theory of change as a result always. So yeah, beautifully put. James, over to you. Tell us a little bit about that role for you and your organisation, and then also with your staff, board and audiences as well.
So I think it might be worth to restate our mission, which is that we support life through art. And I really, really believe that. We're a small arts organisation, and it's probably common in the sector that the concept of sustainability isn't a new thing. The sector exists, generally speaking, I think, in an environment of limited resources. I've got a quote here I just wanted to share with you from a writer called Simone, and he's written a piece called "Making Your Life as an Artist." So just kind of that connection between life and art. And he says, "We already have the skills we need to build a beautiful, sustainable life. Artists are overskilled and work incredibly hard. We see value where others do not. We are brilliant problem solvers and tool users. We have the meta skill of learning new skills. Artists are connected to intricate and resilient webs of community. Our communities give us resources to grow and stability to fall back on." So I think we're an organisation that engages with the environment. So really we're seeking to extend that thinking into sustainability for the organisation and for the environment as a whole. So I guess that's applying the skills, creativity and resourcefulness of art practice to the world at large. And we can better manage our resources. I mean, I think the creative industries are pretty good by and large at doing so. But also some future innovation can come from working alongside artists. I think all organisations should have artists in residence. You can really champion the resourcefulness of artists as problem solvers, whilst they're excellent at advocating and investigating environmental sustainability through our artistic program. We've got, I think our board are pretty green, although we're in the process of trustee recruitment at the moment. I think I'd like to see more environmental, or see our environmental commitments more explicitly represented at board level. Really interested in the climate literacy program that Annie mentioned. I think, yeah, it'd be good to kind of, there's always room for more knowledge. Likewise with our team, we're a small team, and I think we're kind of, it was a really simple statement that Annie said about kind of not assuming. With a small team, I think I'm slightly safer to do so, and we're all fairly on the same page. But I think that's a really interesting point about kind of, making sure that is the case. And we've talked a little bit already about audiences and changing the minds of those that need changing. I think art's a subtle force that can sort of meander around and through obstacles. And it's great to work with people that are on the same page as you, but actually the value probably comes from working with those that don't. And it's quite satisfying when you see it. I think that's art's quite unique in that you can change minds and address difficult concepts whilst it can also be uplifting as well.
Such a good challenge to yourself, James, and clearly you and your organisation are challenging yourselves all the time. It is the hardest work to do, but so rewarding when you can achieve that. So yeah, really lovely to hear. Rose, over to you.
Yeah, so I wanted to just mention another strand of our work, which is I touched on the Community Experts Programme. So this is a really key part of the focus of our environmental impact work. So as well as the kind of campaigning and sector engagement side, we're really committed to, yeah, how can we partner with organisations on direct delivery and working with their audiences on the brilliant work that's already happening around environmental benefits. So this programme is really all about how can we increase stakeholdership in climate campaigning at a kind of local level, and how can we enable that? How can we further it? How can we link organisations up who are doing that work? So this has been developed in partnership with Poetic Unity, who are a brilliant youth arts organisation in South London. Their Clean Air for the Ends campaign highlighted how Black South Londoners are being disproportionately impacted by air pollution, which is something that Annie touched on as well in the neighbouring borough. So yeah, what we want to do is strengthen relationships between different global majority grassroots activities happening and cultural organisations as well. So looking at how these communities are engaging in cultural activities and how that's really key to addressing the local impacts of climate change. So we're just building relationships kind of across the country with different organisations who are doing this. I should say we are awaiting a funding decision. So we're really hoping that this programme can grow and continue. But if it does go ahead in the way we would like it to, it will involve things like peer exchange learning sessions led by representatives from those grassroots groups from across England, across the UK, if we can extend it as well. So really that idea of like fostering relationship building, knowledge sharing, that convening side of things that we've been talking about. And yeah, how can we kind of further and harness collective strategies really? And then the development of work. So whether that's a case study toolbox, a creative response to the climate crisis from those groups, just trying to be as kind of empowering as possible through this work for those different groups. And yeah, like how can community-driven approaches to addressing climate inequalities, how can those be shared and celebrated? And we'd like to bring people together through an event. You know, there's nothing quite like a physical exchange of ideas. So we're working on what that might look like later in the year as well, and how that might link up with our thought leadership work and our annual lecture that we hold. So yeah, really excited about that, as well as the broader sector work as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rose. Really exciting work. And yeah, just loving that grassroots piece to that and not assuming it always has to be our institutions or formal organisations that lead things. And we have so much to learn, as James has already said. So my last question for you all, if I may, is what role would you like to see, and do you think culture can play in addressing the climate emergency? James, I'll come to you, then to you, Annie, and then Rose, if you can sum us up, that would be lovely. Thank you. James.
So I've got another quote here, if I may. This actually came from an audience member, some brilliant feedback from an exhibition we put on. I know some of you are familiar with it. It's by Gus Beth. And he says, I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. I think many artists do know how to do that. And I think we've got a duty to help communicate climate emergency and to shape narratives, inspire change and shift public attitudes. Artists are also good at imagining unimaginable futures. And what's also struck me over the past few years, particularly during COVID and lockdowns, is there's only so much bad news people can take. And I think we'll find an increasing need for positivity and inspiration from the arts. Annie has mentioned it a few times about avoiding climate anxiety. And I think we've addressed some difficult topics, but done so in a way which can be uplifting and hopeful, perhaps. I think if nothing else, it's cool for art to be beautiful again. Maybe I'll leave it there.
That's a pretty great place to leave it, James. And thank you for that wonderful and inspiring quote. Annie.
So I think from a museum's perspective, we have collections and displays and green spaces that are just full of stories and culture and impact from across the world, from across different time periods. And we've talked a bit about what we as organisations are good at. So, we have the tools and the expertise to work with partners in source communities, in Indigenous communities, and to share those stories in a way that gives our audiences a different perspective, which highlights that inequality of how the climate crisis impacts different people, not just at a local level, but at a global level. And giving that different perspective in a way that's relevant and in a way that's engaging, hopefully fosters that sense of empathy. So I think we are spaces that can communicate those stories well, and that we should be proud of being able to do that and continue doing that in a greater and larger way. So I think through our spaces, but also our digital footprints, a really wide range of people can access what we have. So it's all about broadening that access and communicating and engaging in this creative, playful, inclusive, participatory way that we all strive to. That's the first step towards behaviour change. And I'll just keep on coming back to that, giving people that real, tangible experience. That's the impact that we can have. That's the impact that culture can have. And it means so much more when you can experience it in that way. I think that's a really valuable space for us to be positioning ourselves in.
Thanks, Annie. I can hear the passion as you're articulating that. So thank you. Rose.
So I'm going to take inspiration from James and start with another quote as well. This is the brilliant Indian writer Amitav Ghosh. He said, let us make no mistake, the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture and thus of the imagination. That's from his brilliant 2016 book, The Great Derangement, which in many ways kind of kicked off this whole conversation that we're having about the role of culture in the climate emergency and that we've been thinking about so much over the past few years. So the culture and heritage sectors really, as we know, hold enormous power to kind of shape, drive change in the climate crisis, which you know, we know is an accelerating huge existential threat to all of us, but still isn't being addressed in at the rate we need it to be, and unfortunately shows fewer signs perhaps of being globally than it did even in recent years. I think the culture sector can play a hugely powerful role here, engages our imagination. I love that idea of playfulness that Annie mentioned. Has just enormous power to reach hearts and minds, and just needs to be at the heart of national global strategies. So yeah, my I guess my final thought provocation would be how can we move even further towards this, towards harnessing the massive soft power of our entire sector to reimagine our world, inspire communities, funders, policymakers to take climate action.
Thank you all. And well, I hope our viewers are feeling as inspired as I am, because really brilliant and impressive work. And thank you all for the great work you're doing, as well as all of you for your time today and sharing that with our audiences. So James, Annie and Rose, thank you all. So Katie's colleagues will be online for the next 10 minutes to answer any questions that those of you watching might have via the comments section. And just a reminder that, of course, Achates is here to help. We are a strategy, income generation, recruitment and organisational company. And we also recently launched our online platform, which has a total system approach to supporting every aspect of your cultural organisation from a purpose-led perspective. And of course, we're offering a leadership program alongside that, as well as networking, as well as the webinars itself. And it's a great low-cost offer to supporting your organisation in these challenging times. And you can sign up to that via our website. We'll be back with our next Achates Inspires session in April. And if there's a topic that's particularly at the top of your list that you'd like to discuss, do just let us know via email or on social media. But for now, another big thank you to James, to Annie and to Rose for a really thought-provoking session this morning. Thanks so much, everyone, for your time. Goodbye.